They say the lantern guides the lost, but here...
The dog found it first. I was running south on the fire road above Crestline when Briar stopped, locked her legs, and refused to move. German Shepherd, 7 years old, trained for search and rescue before I adopted her out of a handler's divorce settlement. Briar didn't stop for squirrels, didn't stop for bears, didn't stop for the 2 infected we'd passed at the trailhead an hour ago. The one standing in the parking lot facing the restroom building, swaying like kelp in a current nobody else could feel. She'd pulled me past them without breaking stride, because Briar understood threat hierarchy better than any person I'd ever worked with. If she stopped, the reason outranked everything else. She was staring at the hillside, not at an animal, not at a person. At the ground itself, a section of slope where the manzanita grew in a pattern that looked natural until you followed her sight line and saw what she saw, a seam, horizontal, 6 feet wide, running along the base of a granite outcrop at a height that matched the surrounding brush line exactly. Engineered camouflage. Someone had built a door into this mountain and landscaped it to disappear. If you want to know what was hidden behind that mountain door, please subscribe now. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. My name is Renata Mares. I'm a mail carrier. Rural Road. San Bernardino Mountain Communities. Lake Arrowhead, Running Springs, Crestline, the unincorporated stretches between. I've driven and walked these roads 6 days a week for 11 years, and I'd never seen this seam. Never noticed the outcrop as anything other than geology. Briar was smelling something behind it. Not decay. I'd learned that smell in the last 72 hours, the copper-sweet wrongness that preceded contact. This was different. Mechanical. Oiled steel and recirculated air leaking through a gap too small to see, but not too small for a dog trained to find people buried under rubble. 3 days ago, the outbreak was a headline. 2 days ago, it was a sound. Sirens layered so thick over San Bernardino that the individual vehicles dissolved into a single chord. Yesterday, it reached the mountain communities. I was mid-route, delivering to a mailbox on Hook Creek Road, when I saw my first infected at close range. A woman in gardening gloves standing in her own driveway, holding a rake she'd forgotten how to use. Her head canted at an angle that meant the muscles on the left side of her neck had stopped receiving instructions. She didn't look at me. She looked at the mailbox. I put the mail in the box and drove to the next address, because that's what you do when you're a carrier. You complete the route. The route is the structure. The route is what keeps you moving forward on days when forward is the only direction that isn't towards something you can't process. I completed 7 more deliveries before the road was blocked by a sheriff's cruiser parked sideways across both lanes. Empty, engine running, driver's door open. That's when I left the vehicle. Took Briar, took my pack. I carry a day pack on the route, always have. Water and food, and a first aid kit, because the mountain roads are remote and cell service is theoretical. And started walking. 72 hours of walking. Fire roads, game trails, the spines of ridgelines, where the terrain was too steep for the infected to accumulate. I'd learned the same topographic lesson everyone in the mountains was learning. They moved downhill. They collected in drainages, in valleys, in the flat spots where roads ran and houses clustered and people had built their lives in the accessible places. The ridgelines were empty. The high ground was safe. And I was good at covering ground, because 11 years of walking routes in weather had given me legs that didn't quit, and a knowledge of this terrain that was cellular, embedded in my feet. Now, Briar was telling me there was a door in the mountain, and behind us, somewhere on the fire road we'd been following, something had started to move. I couldn't see it yet. But Briar's ears had rotated. One forward toward the seam, one back toward the road. She'd split her attention, which meant 2 competing signals, which meant the decision had a timer on it. I stepped off the fire road and pushed into the manzanita toward the seam. The brush was dense enough to scratch, but not dense enough to stop me. Briar threaded through it at heel, silent, her body language compressed into the low, forward posture she used during live searches. When the scent was strong and the target was close, the seam resolved as I approached. Not a natural crack in the granite. A machined joint, weathered to match the surrounding rock, but betraying itself in the precision of its line. The manzanita growing along it had been planted, not volunteered. The root balls were set at uniform depth, visible where erosion had exposed the base of the slope. I ran my fingers along the seam. Cold stone, then a gap, maybe a quarter inch, where the air pushed outward. The exhalation Breyer had detected. It smelled like a building. Filtered air, concrete, the faintly metallic signature of climate control. Behind this rock face was an interior space, ventilated, maintained, alive. There was no handle, no keypad, no card reader, no visible mechanism. I pressed along the seam's length, pushing at intervals, looking for a latch or a pressure point. Nothing. The door, if it was a door, didn't want it to be opened from outside. It probably hadn't been designed to be opened from outside. This was infrastructure built to be accessed from within, through tunnels or corridors that connected to some entrance I'd never find in time. Behind me, on the fire road, the sound clarified, not footsteps. The infected didn't walk with the purposeful cadence of living people. This was a dragging, irregular, multi-limbed sound, like several bodies moving in loose proximity without coordinating their gait. A group, heading south on the same road I'd been following, pulled by the same downhill gravity that governed all their movement. Except the fire road here ran along the contour, not downhill. They weren't following gravity. They were following something else. Breyer pressed her nose against the gap in the seam and whined. A sound she almost never made, high and thin, the frequency she used when a search target was present but inaccessible. Trapped, alive but unreachable. She was telling me someone was inside. I knocked, stupid, desperate. The kind of action that belongs to a world with doorbells and neighbors. I knocked on the granite face with my fist 3 times, and the sound was flat and enormous against the stone. Nothing happened. The dragging from the fire road grew more distinct. I estimated 2 minutes before the group would pass the point where I'd left the road. Whether they'd follow my trail into the brush depended on whatever sense they used to navigate. Vibration, scent, sound. I just made a sound. I knocked again, harder. Someone's in there. I can feel the air. I have a dog. We need to get off this ridge. Silence from the stone. Sound from the road. Closer. The manzanita beginning to rustle at the trail side as bodies pushed into it. Not with intention, but with the indifference of mass finding the path of least resistance. Then a click. Mechanical. Precise. Somewhere inside the rock. A pause. Another click. Deeper. Structural. A bolt retracting. The seam widened. Not swinging open like a door, but sliding. The entire granite-faced panel moving laterally into a pocket in the hillside with a smoothness that belonged to a different century than the rusted fire road above us. Behind it, a steel frame, a rubber gasket, and a corridor lit by recessed LEDs at ankle height. Amber dim, extending into the mountain at a slight downward grade. A voice from inside, male, middle-aged, controlled. Leave the dog outside. The dog comes with me. The space is sterile. Animals compromise. The dog comes with me, or I stay out here and see what's coming up that hill. A pause. The rustling in the manzanita was close enough now that I could distinguish individual bodies moving through it. 3, maybe 4, dispersing laterally from the fire road. Get in, the voice said. Breyer and I stepped through the frame. The panels slid shut behind us with a sound like a coffin lid in a film I'd never want to watch, and the outside world. The manzanita, the fire road, the dragging sound. The sky ceased to exist. The corridor ran 40 feet at a 5-degree decline before terminating at a second door. This one undisguised, heavy steel, painted the specific gray-green that means federal government the way certain blues mean police. It was open. The man who'd spoken stood beside it. He was shorter than his voice suggested. Maybe 5'8", compact build, wearing khaki pants and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. No uniform, no insignia. Clean-shaven, hair trimmed recently. His shoes were leather. Indoor shoes. The kind a person wears when they haven't been outside in weeks. He looked at Breyer with the expression of someone who has just lost a negotiation and is calculating the cost. "Warren Tremaine," he said, and offered his hand the way that people do when they're buying time to assess you. I shook it. "Renata Maris. What were you doing on that ridge, Renata?" "Walking south." "What are you doing inside this mountain, Warren?" He didn't answer. He led us through the second door and into a space that stopped me in my steps. Not because it was large. It was. But size alone wouldn't have halted me. It was the completeness. The room beyond the door was a fully equipped operations center. Console stations with dark screens, a central table with a surface that might have been a display panel, shelving along 2 walls stocked with labeled containers, and overhead lighting that hummed at a frequency designed to mimic daylight. The ceiling was smooth concrete, the floor polished aggregate. The air tasted like it had been scrubbed of everything that makes air interesting. No dust, no moisture, no organic particulate. Machine-made atmosphere. Beyond the operations center, through open doorways, I could see additional rooms. A corridor branching left and right, sleeping quarters visible through one door, a kitchen through another. The facility was sized for maybe 12 people. It held 1. "How long have you been alone in here?" I asked. Warren sat on a rolling chair and crossed his arms. The facility was designed for continuity of operations during a regional emergency. I was the assigned maintenance technician. "I've been on site for 8 months. 8 months. The outbreak started 3 days ago. The facility has been operational for 11 years. My rotation started in July. I maintain the systems, verify the equipment, and keep the space ready for the principals who are supposed to arrive when it's activated." Principals, the people this was built for. Regional chain of command officials, emergency managers. The people who are supposed to run things when things stop running, and they haven't come. Warren uncrossed his arms, recrossed them. "The activation signal was sent 61 hours ago. Standard protocol. Signal goes out. Principals report within 12 hours. The facility is designed to receive and support them. They have the access codes, the route maps, the cover stories for leaving their regular positions. 12 hours. 61 hours ago? Nobody came." He said it without visible emotion, but the sentence carried weight he wasn't distributing evenly. Nobody came. The facility was ready. The systems were maintained. The maintenance tech had done his job for 8 months in solitary rotation, keeping the lights on and the air clean and the consoles dusted for people who had the codes and the maps and the institutional obligation to show up when the signal fired. And nobody came. He was sitting in a building built for a government that had stopped governing, maintained by a man whose entire function was to prepare a space that would never be used for its intended purpose. Breyer circled the room, nose working, cataloging the space in her own way. She found a spot near the kitchen doorway and lay down her operational rest position, alert but conserving energy. She'd decided the space was safe. That was worth more to me than anything Warren had said. "So it's just you," I said. It was just me. Now it's me, you, and a German shepherd in a facility rated for 12. "Sounds like you have a room." Warren's mouth compressed. Not hostility, something closer to the expression of a man who has been waiting for someone, and the someone who showed up isn't the someone he was expecting. Warren gave me a tour because Warren was a man who processed disruption through procedure. He walked me through the facility the way he probably walked it every day. Systematically, left to right, naming each room and its function with the rehearsed cadence of someone who'd given this tour in his head 1,000 times, but never to another person. The layout was symmetrical. Central operations room branching into 2 residential wings, each containing 3 private quarters with bunks, a shared bathroom, and a storage closet. left wing, right wing. Between them, kitchen and dining. Mechanical room housing the ventilation and power systems. A communications alcove with equipment I didn't recognize. And a room Warren called the vault, which was locked with a combination he didn't offer to share. The power came from a geothermal tap. The San Bernardino Mountains sit on enough subsurface heat to run a small facility indefinitely, and someone with a large budget had drilled into it. Water came from a capped well, filtered and recirculated. Food storage held 18 months of provisions for 12 people, which meant, Warren did the math aloud, automatically, roughly 9 years for one, or 4.5 for two, or some duration for some number that he trailed off before completing, because the math depended on a question he hadn't yet asked, which was how long I intended to stay. I didn't answer the unasked question. Instead, I asked about the communications alcove. Hardened satellite uplink, he said. Encrypted. Designed for the principals to maintain contact with other continuity sites. Other sites? There are more of these? I don't have the network map. My clearance is maintenance level. I can keep the systems running. I can't access what they carry. Can you reach anyone? I've been transmitting on the emergency channels since the activation signal. Automated beacon, no response. 61 hours of beacon and nothing. 63 now. I leaned against the corridor wall. The concrete was cool, steady. The kind of surface that doesn't change temperature because it exists in a place where temperature is controlled and the concept of weather is irrelevant. Warren stood opposite me, maintaining a distance that was polite but measured. The spatial habits of a man who hadn't shared a room with another person in 8 months and was recalibrating his sense of proximity. Warren, who were the principals? I can't disclose that. They're not coming. You said so yourself. I said they haven't come. That's different. Is it? He looked at the floor. The polished aggregate reflected the overhead lights in a way that made it look like the surface was deeper than it was. You could fall into it if you stared long enough. There are protocols for delayed arrival. Extended holding. The facility remains in ready status until what? Until someone with a code shows up? Until someone with authority makes a determination. You've been alone in a mountain for 8 months, waiting for people with authority. And the only person who showed up is a mail carrier with a dog. Authority isn't coming, Warren. Whatever authority built this place is standing in a parking lot somewhere, staring at a restroom door. The reference landed. He'd been monitoring the surface through limited external sensors. Cameras, I assumed, though he hadn't shown me. And he'd seen what was happening above. He knew. But knowing and integrating knowledge are different operations. And Warren had been running on the maintenance track for so long that switching to a different cognitive rail required a force he hadn't yet encountered. Breyer stood up in the kitchen doorway and looked at me. Dinner time. Even in a geothermally powered government bunker hidden inside a mountain, the dog's schedule held. Show me the kitchen, I said. I'll cook. You think about what happens when you stop waiting for people who aren't coming and start figuring out what this place is actually for. He opened his mouth, closed it, and led me to the kitchen. Warren cooked. He wouldn't let me. This wasn't hospitality. It was territorial behavior expressed through canned vegetables. The kitchen was his. He'd organized it, inventoried it, rotated the stock on a schedule pinned to the inside of a cabinet door. He selected 2 cans of beef stew from a specific shelf position, heated them on an electric range that drew power from the earth itself, and served them in ceramic bowls that he placed on the dining table at positions he'd clearly established through months of solo meals. His position was the chair facing the corridor, the sight line to the operations room. He put me across from him, facing the wall. I moved my chair to the adjacent side so I could see the corridor too. He noticed. He didn't comment. Breyer ate a portion of stew in her own bowl on the floor, which Warren provided without being asked, and I noted this. The man who'd tried to leave her outside had a bowl ready at floor height within 3 minutes of dinner. People reveal themselves in the gap between their stated rules and their automatic behavior. Warren's stated rule was sterile protocol. His automatic behavior was feeding a dog from a clean dish. The sensors, I said between bites. The ones monitoring the surface. What are they showing? Movement consistent with what the news was reporting before the news stopped. Concentrated in the lower elevations, the mountain communities are partially overrun. Crestline and Lake Arrowhead show high density around commercial centers and road intersections. The ridgelines and upper terrain are sparse. What about people? Living people. The sensors aren't designed to distinguish. They read thermal signatures and motion patterns. I can differentiate to some extent. Living people move with directional purpose. The infected move with, he searched for the word, no purpose. Diffuse orientation. But at distance, on low-resolution thermal, the distinction breaks down. I see movement. I categorize it as probable living or probable infected based on speed and direction. The ratio has been shifting. Which way? Toward infected, significantly. In the first 24 hours, I tracked maybe 60% probable living signatures on the mountain roads. Now it's under 15%. The stew was good. Commercial quality, the kind of thing bought in institutional quantities for people who would eat it without complaint, because complaining about food in a government continuity facility during a regional emergency would be professionally inappropriate. I ate all of it. Walking for 3 days burns calories that canned stew can't fully replace. But it starts the process. The beacon you're transmitting, I said. If other facilities like this exist, and they're monitoring the emergency channel, they're hearing you. If they're staffed. If their maintenance rotations were current. If the equipment is operational. A lot of ifs for a system that was supposed to be redundant. Warren set down his spoon. The system was designed for a specific category of emergency. Natural disaster, infrastructure collapse, limited nuclear exchange, scenarios where the government is damaged but functional, where the chain of command is disrupted but intact. This, he gestured vaguely at the ceiling, at the mountain above us, at the world. This doesn't match the design parameters. The principles aren't delayed. They're gone. The chain of command isn't disrupted. It's dissolved. The system is operating perfectly in an emergency it was never built for. This was the first honest thing Warren had said. Not factual honesty. Everything he'd told me was factual. Emotional honesty. The admission that the thing he maintained was orphaned. That his 8 months of diligent rotation, his daily walks through the facility, his calibration checks and inventory rotations, and careful preservation of a government that expected to survive any crisis had been performed in service of an assumption that was now visibly, irreversibly false. What's in the vault? I asked. The question changed the air between us. Not tension exactly. A boundary encountered. Operational materials? Classified. Warren, I don't have the combination. I watched his face. He was telling the truth. The maintenance technician maintained everything except the one room that held whatever the principals were supposed to use when they arrived. He'd kept the systems ready for people who would walk past him, enter the room he couldn't open, and execute plans he wasn't cleared to know. His job was to make other people's authority possible. Who has the combination? The principals, who aren't coming. He picked up his spoon and resumed eating, which was its own kind of answer. I slept in the left wing, second room. Warren had offered the first room, but I chose the second, because it didn't share a wall with the operations center. And I wanted one layer of concrete between me and the hum of equipment that had been waiting for masters who'd evaporated. Briar slept across the doorway. Her choice, her habit, the position she took when she was on watch in a new environment. I woke to a sound I couldn't place, not the ventilation, not the geothermal system's low pulse, a rhythmic electronic tone, repeating at 2-second intervals, coming from the operations center. I checked my watch. 4:17 a.m., though a.m. and p.m. had no meaning underground. Briar was already up, ears forward, not alarmed, but attentive. Warren was at the central console. He'd powered up one of the screens, the first active screen I'd seen in the facility, and was staring at it with the concentration of a man who has just seen something he'd rehearsed for, but never believed would happen. What is it? Response to the beacon. His voice was different. Higher in register, faster in tempo. The controlled maintenance tech cadence was gone, replaced by something that sounded like the man underneath it. Younger, more urgent, less rehearsed. Automated, encrypted, but it's on the correct channel and using the correct protocol header. Another facility. Where? I can't determine location from the signal. The protocol is designed to confirm existence without revealing position. It's a handshake. I transmit, they acknowledge. The next step requires authentication codes that the principals carry. You can't talk to them. I can confirm they're there. They can confirm I'm here. But the communication channel doesn't open without principal-level access. The vault. He turned from the screen. In the amber console light, his face looked like it belonged to two people. The maintenance technician who served the protocol and the person trapped inside the protocol who wanted to break it open. The vault contains, among other things, the authentication codes and the communication encryption keys. Without them, this handshake is the full extent of what I can do. I can knock. I can hear them knock back. Neither of us can open the door. So open the vault. I told you, I don't have... Then we break into it. The sentence sat between us like a thrown object. Warren's face cycled through a sequence I could read because I'd spent 11 years reading people through their mailboxes. The hesitation, the institutional reflex, the fear of consequence from an authority that no longer existed, and finally the human calculation underneath. What do I actually lose? The vault door is reinforced steel, combination lock, mechanical, no electronic bypass. It was designed to resist forced entry. Designed to resist people with what? Cutting torches, explosives? Designed to resist unauthorized access during a crisis when security personnel might not be present. So it's designed to resist us, specifically, the people who are actually here. Warren turned back to the screen. The acknowledgement signal pulsed, 2 seconds on, 2 seconds off. A heartbeat from another mountain or another desert or another invisible hole in the ground where another maintenance technician sat alone, watching a screen, waiting for a handshake to become a conversation. I have tools, he said quietly. Maintenance tools. Not breaching equipment, but I have a drill press, angle grinders, a cutting wheel. The facility has a machine shop for equipment repair. How long to get through the door? I don't know. I've never tried. I've never considered trying. The vault is. It's the center of the design. Everything else in this facility exists to support what's in that room. Breaking into it would be the first useful thing this place has done since the signal went out. He sat with that. The acknowledgement pulse continued its patient rhythm. Somewhere in the dark infrastructure of a government that had built redundancy into everything except the humans it depended on, another facility was reaching out. And the only thing between contact and isolation was a lock built to keep us out of our own salvation. Tomorrow, Warren said, let me think about it tonight. I didn't push. I'd learned on the route that some doors open if you wait beside them. Not all, but some. Warren didn't sleep. I know because Breyer's ears tracked him through the walls, pacing in the operations center, then the machine shop, then back. The acknowledgement signal pulsed through the night, its rhythm absorbed into the ambient hum of the facility until it became part of the air, part of the architecture, another system maintaining itself for an audience that hadn't arrived. At what my watch called 7 a.m., I found him in the machine shop. He'd laid out tools on a steel workbench, an angle grinder with 3 cutting discs, a heavy-duty drill with cobalt bits, a pry bar, and a small acetylene torch I hadn't seen during the tour. The tools were arranged with the same compulsive precision he applied to everything, parallel, evenly spaced, organized by intended sequence of use. I measured the door last night, he said without looking up. The lock housing is cast steel, mounted through the door into a reinforced frame. The bolt mechanism extends into the concrete jamb on 3 sides. Even if I cut through the lock face, the bolts hold. So we go through the door itself. The door is 1/4-inch plate steel with a concrete core. The cutting wheel can handle the steel. The concrete will burn through the discs. I have 7 discs. Is that enough? I don't know. Probably not. I picked up the acetylene torch, small, portable, the kind used for brazing pipes and cutting thin stock, not a breaching tool. But if the cutting wheel handled the steel skin and exposed the concrete core, the torch could heat the concrete until it cracked, and the pry bar could clear the debris. Layer by layer, concrete, steel, bolt mechanism. Each layer a different tool, a different technique, a different problem. How long? I asked. If it works at all, 8 to 12 hours? Then we start now. Warren picked up the angle grinder and held it for a moment, testing the weight, finding the grip. I recognized the gesture. It was the same thing I did with a new route map. The physical negotiation between a tool and the hand that would use it. He'd maintained this facility for 8 months, without touching the one door he wasn't supposed to open. And now the grinder's weight was the weight of that accumulated obedience being set aside. We walked to the vault. The door was at the end of a short corridor off the operations center, set into the wall with no signage, no markings, just a combination dial centered at chest height and a handle below it. Warren had passed this door twice daily for 8 months, cleaning the corridor, checking the overhead light, never turning the handle because the handle wasn't his to turn. He pressed the grinder's disc against the lock housing and looked at me. Once I do this, the lock is destroyed regardless of whether we get through. If the principals arrive, Warren, I know they're not coming, but saying it and doing this are different things. They are. Do it anyway. He pulled the trigger. The grinder screamed, a sound so foreign to the facility's controlled silence that Breyer scrambled to her feet in the operations center and barked once, sharply, before settling into a rigid stance at the corridor entrance. Sparks cascaded off the lock housing in a fountain that bounced off the concrete floor and died. The smell of cut steel filled the corridor, acrid and vital. The smell of something being opened that was built to stay closed. The first disc lasted 20 minutes. It cut through the outer housing and exposed the lock mechanism. Dense, layered, built by people who understood that some doors carry the weight of an assumption that should never be tested. Warren changed the disc and continued. The second cut went deeper, into the bolt assembly, where the grinder's pitch changed as it met harder alloy. I watched. I had no tool skill to contribute. My usefulness was somewhere else in this process. I didn't yet know where, but I knew it wasn't in the cutting. So I watched, and I held the flashlight steady. And I told Breyer she was a good dog when the noise made her flatten her ears. 4 hours in, 3 discs spent, and we'd breached the outer steel plate around the lock mechanism and exposed 8 inches of the concrete core. Warren's arms were shaking from the grinder's vibration. He set it down, flexed his hands, and sat against the corridor wall. My rotation was supposed to end in April, he said. They'd send a replacement. I'd go home to Flagstaff, file my service report, not talk about this place for the rest of my life. Where did they find you? I found them. Government job listing, maintenance technician, undisclosed location, extended rotation, security clearance required. I'd been doing HVAC work for the Forest Service. This paid triple. Did you know what it was? Not until I arrived. They drove me here in a vehicle with blacked-out windows. I thought it was a radar installation or a seed vault or something mundane. When they showed me the operations center, the residential wings, the communications equipment, I understood it was something else. But they never said the word, never called it what it was. The documentation refers to it as a Regional Continuity Support Facility, RCSF. Everything has an acronym. Nothing has a name. I handed him a water bottle from the kitchen. He drank half of it in a continuous swallow. The hydration pattern of someone doing hard physical labor for the first time in months. The torch next, he said. Heat the concrete, let it fracture, clear it with the bar, rest first. We don't know how long the other facility will keep transmitting. The acknowledgement could be on a timer. If it's automated, There might be a window. He was right. The handshake signal was a machine reaching out to a machine, and machines follow schedules that don't account for the speed of human effort. If the other facility's beacon cycled off, hourly, daily, according to whatever protocol governed its transmission, we'd lose the contact and have no way to reestablish it without the codes we were currently grinding toward. Warren picked up the torch. I stepped back. He lit the flame and directed it at the exposed concrete, holding it at an angle that concentrated heat on a narrow band. The concrete changed color, gray to white to a faint orange at the contact point. After 10 minutes, a crack appeared, then another. The thermal stress was working, creating fracture lines that the pry bar could exploit. While he worked, I returned to the operations center. The acknowledgement signal was still pulsing on the console. I sat in Warren's chair and studied the screen. Data I couldn't fully interpret, but some elements were legible. Signal strength, bearing, a directional indicator that suggested the other facility was transmitting from the northwest. Oregon, maybe, Nevada, somewhere in the same geographic band of mountains and desert where governments hide the things they don't want found. Briar followed me to the console and sat at my feet. I rested my hand on her head and felt the fine tremor in her jaw, the tension she carried when she was processing more information than she could act on. She could hear the torches hiss through the wall, could smell the heated concrete, could feel through the floor the tiny vibrations of Warren's effort. And she could hear something else, I realized. Her ear. The one that rotated backward, the one that monitored what was behind us, was turned toward the entrance corridor, toward the granite door, toward the mountain's exterior. I went to the sensor station Warren had described. 3 screens, all dark. I found the power switch and activated them. They flickered to life, showing grainy thermal imagery. The fire road, the slope below the entrance, a wider shot of the terrain to the south. The resolution was poor, the refresh rate slow, but the images were current. The fire road was not empty. The thermal signatures were scattered at first glance, warm shapes against cool ground, distributed along the road and into the manzanita on both sides. I counted 12. Then I counted again, because several were overlapping and reached 17. They were arranged in a pattern I recognized from Renata the mail carrier's 11 years of reading addresses from a vehicle. They were facing the same direction. All of them, oriented toward the hillside, toward the outcrop, toward the seam. They'd found the door. I walked to the vault corridor. Warren was on his knees, driving the pry bar into a fracture line in the concrete. A section the size of a playing card broke free and fell to the floor, exposing the interior steel plate. The second skin, the last barrier before the bolt mechanism and whatever lay behind it. Warren. The sensors. He paused. Pry bar wedged in the crack. Sweat had soaked through his shirt between the shoulder blades. There are 17 infected on the slope outside the entrance, all oriented toward the door. He didn't react the way I expected. No alarm, no urgency, no acceleration. He withdrew the pry bar, set it down carefully, and stood, wiped his forehead with his sleeve. Then he said something that reordered everything I understood about the facility. They can't get through the entrance. The panel is 3-inch composite. Steel, concrete, steel. And it's seated in a granite frame. The only way in is with the correct access mechanism, which is biometric and keyed to 6 people. 7, including me. Biometric, palm print and pulse signature. The mechanism reads both. A living hand with the correct print and a detectable heartbeat. The infected have neither. Their prints are degraded, and their circulatory patterns don't register as viable. That door is inert to them. You're sure? The door is the one thing I'm completely sure about. It was the first system I tested when I arrived, and I've tested it monthly since. It doesn't fail. It doesn't decay. It's the most reliable component in the facility. Then why are they standing out there? Warren walked to the sensor station and studied the thermal images. The 17 figures hadn't moved. They stood in their scattered arrangement, all facing the hillside, a congregation directed toward a shrine they couldn't see and couldn't reach, but could somehow detect. "The ventilation exhaust," he said. "It exits through a dispersal array on the backside of the outcrop. The air is filtered, so there's no chemical signature, but the temperature differential, underground air meeting mountain air, creates a faint thermal plume. At night, on thermal, you'd see it as a column of slightly warm air rising from the rock. In daylight, invisible. They're feeling the warmth. Or the vibration. The geothermal system produces a low-frequency pulse, below human hearing, but detectable through contact with the ground. If they're sensitive to subsurface vibration." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The facility's power source was also its signature. The same geothermal tap that made it self-sufficient made it perceptible to anything attuned to the Earth's mechanical activity. The door would hold, but the crowd would grow. "How many before it matters?" I asked. "Matters how? How many bodies on that slope before the weight, the pressure, the accumulated mass starts testing the entrance panel?" Warren returned to the vault corridor without answering. He picked up the torch and relit it. The blue flame hissed against the concrete core, and a new fracture line appeared, branching from the first, deepening. "We need what's in this room," he said. "That's the only thing that matters right now." I disagreed. What mattered was the crowd on the slope, which was growing. I checked the sensors again 20 minutes later and counted 23. And the door that Warren trusted completely, because trust was the only relationship he had with this facility. He trusted the door. He trusted the systems. He trusted the protocols. He trusted the institution that had built this place and staffed it with one man and told him to wait. I trusted Briar. And Briar was standing at the corridor that led to the entrance, facing it, her body rigid, her ears both rotated forward. She wasn't monitoring two signals anymore. She was focused on one, and the one she was focused on was coming from the granite door that Warren said couldn't fail. "Warren," I said from the sensor station, "come look at this." He came. On the wide-angle thermal view, the slope below the entrance had changed. The scattered individuals had consolidated, no longer 17 or 23 distinct shapes facing the same direction. Now, a mass, a thermal bloom, bodies pressed together in a density that obscured individual signatures, and the mass was centered on the entrance, not distributed around the ventilation exhaust on the backside, on the entrance itself, as if the dispersed attention had focused, sharpened, and located the specific 6-foot seam in the rock that Briar had found hours earlier. "They can't get through," Warren said, but his voice had lost the certainty it carried 10 minutes ago. "They found the seam, Warren, the same way my dog did." On the screen, the thermal mass pulsed, a slow compression and expansion, rhythmic, like a single organism breathing against the granite face of a mountain that held something it wanted. The inner steel plate surrendered at hour 9. Warren's final cutting disc disintegrated 20 seconds into the last cut, so he finished with the torch, burning through the remaining quarter-inch of plate steel in a process that filled the corridor with smoke. The ventilation system strained to clear. The bolt mechanism, exposed and partially severed, yielded to the pry bar with a sound like a bone breaking. The vault door swung inward 6 inches, stuck on debris, and Warren shouldered it the rest of the way open. The room beyond was smaller than I'd imagined, maybe 10 by 12, lined with steel shelving on 3 walls, illuminated by a single overhead fixture that activated when the door opened. No dust. The seal had been total. The air inside was older than the air outside, preserved at whatever temperature and humidity the room had been closed at. And it smelled like paper and plastic, and the faintly sweet scent of lithium batteries in storage. Warren stepped inside and stopped. I watched him take it in. The room he'd maintained an approach to for 8 months, without ever seeing the interior. His eyes moved across the shelves with the systematic attention he applied to everything, cataloging, categorizing, and I could see the moment his expression changed from inventory to comprehension. The shelves held binders, dozens of them, labeled with alphanumeric codes, organized by colored dividers, operations manuals, communications protocols, authentication procedures, network maps. The paper infrastructure of a government continuity system, redundantly documented in physical form because paper survives electromagnetic pulse and doesn't require a password. Beside the binders, sealed cases containing what I assumed were the encryption keys, the authentication hardware, the physical tokens that would turn Warren's handshake signal into an open channel. On the bottom shelf of the far wall, in a row of identical black cases, something else. Warren saw them, and his systematic scan halted. He knelt and read the label on the nearest case, then the next, then the third. His face went through a progression I couldn't decode. Recognition, confusion, revision. "What?" I said. He opened the nearest case. Inside, nested in foam, was a device I didn't recognize. Cylindrical, maybe 18 inches long, with a display panel and a series of input ports. Warren lifted it out and turned it slowly, reading markings on the housing. "This is a geological survey transponder," he said. "Military grade. It transmits a coded seismic signal into the bedrock, a pulse pattern that propagates through the substrate and can be read by matching units at other locations. Seismic communication, underground communication. Radio doesn't penetrate rock. Satellite requires surface access. This communicates through the Earth itself, facility to facility, through the mountain range." He counted the cases. 7 transponders. 7 facilities, presumably, in a network connected not by air but by stone. "Warren, is this why the infected are pooling outside? Are these already transmitting?" He checked the display panel. Inactive. Stored, not operational. Whatever signal the infected were following, it wasn't the transponders, but the transponders meant something that reorganized the problem. If the other facilities existed, and the acknowledgement signal said at least one did, then the network was real, the infrastructure was intact, and the only missing component was the human layer that was supposed to activate it. The principals who hadn't come. The chain of command that had dissolved. The architects of a survival system who had themselves not survived. "Can you activate these without the codes?" I asked. Warren was already opening a binder. The one with the red divider. The one his hands went to first, as though 8 months of adjacency had taught him which spine to reach for, even without seeing the contents. He read for 30 seconds. "The transponders are independent of the authentication system. They're geological equipment. The communication protocols are encrypted, but the base transmission function is mechanical. You power it on. It sends a ping, and anything on the same frequency within the propagation range responds. Turn it on." He hesitated. His eyes went to the entrance corridor, toward the granite door, toward the slope where the thermal mass was pressing against the mountain. "If this transmits through the ground, anything sensitive to subsurface vibration will feel it. They already feel us. They're already here. This would be much louder. A directed seismic pulse, repeating. The dilemma sat between us. A new shape, not the familiar, should we open the door, but something I hadn't encountered in 3 days of walking or 8 months of Warren's waiting. Whether to reach outward through the only medium that connected these buried places, knowing the same medium carried the signal to everything above them. I made the decision for him, not by touching the transponder or issuing a command, but by describing what I'd observed on the sensors in the last hour. The thermal mass on the slope growing denser, the individual signatures now numbering over 40, the rhythmic pulsing compression against the entrance that looked less like bodies pressing against stone, and more like pressure testing, like a slow hydraulic force being applied, and released and applied again. "Your door is rated for what?" I asked. "The composite panel withstands." "A number, Warren. 6,000 pounds of static load." "How much does a person weigh?" He didn't answer. 40 bodies at an average of 160 is 6,400 pounds. And they're not static. They're pulsing. Dynamic load exceeds static rating by a factor of... I know the engineering. Then you know the door holds until it doesn't. And the number on that slope is only going in one direction. Warren picked up the transponder. He connected it to a power source from the vault's equipment shelf, a battery pack designed for field deployment, compact, with enough charge for 72 hours of continuous operation. He consulted the binder for activation procedure, followed the steps with his maintenance tech precision, and set the device on the operations center table. Once I activate this, the pulse propagates through the bedrock in every direction. Any matching transponder within range. The documentation says effective radius is 200 miles through continuous geological substrate will receive the signal and respond automatically. We'll know within minutes if the network is real. And so will everything standing on the ground above us. Yes. I looked at Briar. She was still stationed at the entrance corridor, rigid, focused. She'd been in that position for 3 hours. I'd never seen her maintain watch that long without a break. Whatever she was hearing through the granite, it was intensifying. Do it, I said. Warren pressed the activation key. The device produced no audible sound. The signal was subsonic, below the threshold of human perception. But Briar felt it. Her head dropped and she pressed her nose to the floor, then lifted it, then pressed it down again, tracking the pulse through the concrete. The vibration was moving through the facility's foundation, into the bedrock, outward. On the sensor screens, the effect was immediate. The thermal mass on the slope shifted. Not away, not toward, but downward. The bodies that had been pressing against the entrance sank, not falling, not collapsing, lowering themselves to the ground. 40-plus figures dropping from standing to kneeling to prone, pressing their bodies flat against the earth. Every one of them oriented face down, with their hands spread against the soil. They were listening. The pulse was speaking through the ground, and they were pressing themselves against it to hear. They're grounding, I said, like an antenna. Warren watched the screens. His scientific mind was engaged now. I could see it displacing the institutional mind, the maintenance tech mind, the protocol-following mind. He was observing a phenomenon that no binder had documented and no principle had anticipated. If they're receiving the signal, he said, then they know the direction of the source. But they also know the direction of any response, meaning if another facility's transponder answers, the infected on the surface above that facility will receive the same signal. We're not just announcing ourselves. We're announcing the entire network. The weight of that settled over us. Every buried facility, every hidden node in the government's continuity architecture, protected by the same geological concealment that now served as a communication channel. And every signal through that channel was legible to the things lying face down on the ground above, reading the Earth's vibrations with their bodies. At minute 3, the transponder's display changed. A return signal. Then a second. Then a third. 4 facilities responding, their automated transponders answering the handshake with the mindless fidelity of machines doing what machines do when they're asked. 4 facilities, 4 responses, 4 locations where the Earth was now vibrating with a signal that everything on the surface could follow to its source. We have to warn them, I said. Warren was already at the console, but the authentication system was still locked. The binders had the procedures, the vault held the encryption keys, but the keys required the principal-level codes that were themselves locked inside the authentication sequence. A perfect loop. The system protected itself from unauthorized use so effectively that the only authorized users were standing in parking lots, with their heads tilted wrong, and the unauthorized user in the room couldn't break the loop without tools that lived inside it. The transponder, I said, can it carry information, not just a ping, actual data? Warren opened the binder to a section he hadn't reached. Read for 40 seconds. Looked up. There's a modulation function. Low bandwidth. Enough for text. maybe 60 characters per transmission burst. 60 characters to tell 4 buried facilities that the signal they just answered is bringing every infected on the surface directly to their doors. He picked up a pen. Warren's first message was 12 characters too long. He wrote it on the legal pad, counted crossed out words, rewrote. The discipline of compression, saying the essential thing in 60 characters, when the essential thing wanted a paragraph, was a skill neither of us possessed. I'd spent my career delivering other people's messages in sealed envelopes. He'd spent his maintaining a building. Neither of us was a communicator. The final message read, "Surface threat follows seismic signal. Pulse draws them. Respond with caution." 58 characters. Warren entered it into the transponder's modulation interface and transmitted. The device pulsed once. A longer burst than the handshake ping, carrying data in the vibration's shape. We waited. Breyer had moved from the entrance corridor to the operations center, positioning herself between us. Her attention divided between the transponder on the table and the floor beneath her feet. She could feel the signals moving through the rock. The outgoing pulse, the incoming responses, the entire subterranean conversation conducted in a language only she and the infected could perceive. At minute 7, the first response arrived. Not an automated ping, a modulated return. Warren decoded it using the binder's reference tables, writing each character as it resolved. Received. 14 above us. Now prone. What are they? Another facility, another sole occupant, another maintenance technician alone. In a mountain with the same questions and no better answers. Warren composed a reply. Unknown. Sensitive to ground vibration. Cease pulsing to reduce attraction. The second facility responded differently. Not text. A sustained ping. Rapid, frantic in its repetition. Warren checked the binder. That's a distress code. They're signaling emergency. Can they send text? If they know how. Not all technicians receive the same training. My orientation included the transponder system. Some rotations may not have. The third and fourth facilities remained on automated ping. No human modulation. Empty buildings responding because their machines were still running, maintained by geothermal taps that would pulse faithfully into the bedrock for decades, calling out to a network that no longer had anyone to answer, or occupied by technicians who didn't know how to use equipment they'd never been trained on. Hearing the pulse, receiving our message, unable to respond in kind, locked inside their own competence gap, the way Warren had been locked outside his vault. I took the pen from Warren's hand. He looked at me. Surprised? Not offended. Let me try. I wrote on the legal pad. Not a warning. Not a technical instruction. Something else. Something from 11 years of walking routes in all weather to every address, regardless of whether the person inside wanted what I was carrying. The message read, "This is Renata in San Bernardino. MTS, you are not alone. Stay, talk." 57 characters. Personal. Named. An address, not a broadcast. I delivered thousands of pieces of mail to people I never saw, sliding envelopes through slots and doors that never opened. And some of those envelopes were the only evidence those people received all week that the outside world knew they existed. A letter isn't information. A letter is proof of connection. And right now, buried in mountains across the western United States, there were people who needed proof more than they needed data. Warren entered the message and transmitted. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression that had finally shed its institutional layers. No protocol, no maintenance tech distance, no clearance level boundary. Just a man in a room, watching a mail carrier do the thing she'd always done, deliver something to someone who needed it. Through a door that wasn't designed for her, using a system she'd learned on the fly. The second facility, the one sending distress pings, went quiet. 10 seconds, 20. Then a modulated return. Slow, each character spaced, as though the sender was learning the interface mid-transmission. Helen, facility Indy, Nevada. Alone 11 months. Thought I was last. Warren wrote it down. I read it. Briar pressed her nose against the floor and held it there, feeling Helen's words move through the mountain. The conversation with Helen lasted 2 hours. Each exchange was a compression. Lives reduced to 60 characters, context stripped to its mineral core. Every transmission a choice about what mattered enough to survive the bottleneck of bandwidth. She'd been stationed in a facility near Elko, Nevada, assigned the same rotation as Warren, living the same maintenance loop. Her principals hadn't come either. She'd heard the handshake signal and activated her transponder manually after 20 minutes of reading the binder she'd never opened before. Her hands were shaking, she said. She used 9 of her 60 characters to tell us that. Warren and Helen exchanged technical information, system status, supply levels, equipment condition. I exchanged something else. I asked her what she'd been doing for 11 months. She told me she'd been reading the facility's small library of field manuals and had taught herself basic electrical engineering from a reference book left in the machine shop. I asked her if she had a window. She said the sensor screens were her windows, and they showed a salt flat where nothing moved except the heat shimmer until 3 days ago, when shapes appeared at the perimeter of the thermal range and started walking toward the facility's ventilation plume. I told her about Briar. She asked what breed. I told her. She said she'd had a dog once, a beagle named Parcell, and I used my next transmission to tell her that my dog's name was Briar, and she was lying on the floor right now, feeling every word we sent. Warren monitored the sensors while I communicated. The thermal mass on our slope had stabilized, still prone, still grounding, still absorbing the facility's seismic signature through the earth. The number had grown to what Warren estimated as 60, though the overlapping thermal signatures made precision impossible. They weren't pressing against the entrance anymore. The pulsing compression had stopped when the transponder activated. Instead, they lay flat, spread across the slope like a living carpet, absorbing. They're not attacking, Warren said. They're receiving. Receiving what? The same signal Helen is receiving. The same signal all the facilities are receiving. We're broadcasting a network through the substrate, and they're lying on top of it, listening to every word. The implications branched. If the infected could detect the seismic communication, could they interpret it? Could they extract meaning from the modulated pulses? Or were they simply drawn to the vibration itself, the way a moth follows light without understanding photons? The distinction mattered because it determined what the network was. A lifeline connecting survivors, or a trail of breadcrumbs leading the threat to every hidden door in the Mountain West. I asked Helen, infected behavior your location, still approaching or stopped? Her response, stopped 200 meters out, lying down, facing me, not moving. The same pattern, 200 miles apart, 2 facilities pulsing through the bedrock. And in both locations, the infected had transitioned from approach to reception. They'd found the signal, and instead of following it to the source, they'd settled into position and started listening. Maybe that's enough, I said. Warren looked at me. Enough for what? Maybe being heard is enough. For them. Maybe the signal gives them something they need, and once they have it, they stop looking for the source. That's not a theory. That's a hope. Everything in this facility was built on hope, Warren. The hope that government survives. The hope that the principals arrive. The hope that the chain of command holds. This is just a different hope. That the thing we're sending into the ground is feeding them something that makes them stop. He didn't argue. He went to the sensor screens and watched the prone figures on the slope. 60 bodies lying face down on the earth, motionless, their thermal signatures slowly cooling as they matched the ground temperature beneath them, becoming harder to distinguish from the soil, becoming, in the sensor's grainy vision, part of the landscape. The first facility, the one that had sent, received. 14 above us, transmitted again. I decoded it, writing each character as the modulation resolved. Ours are lying down too. Same pattern. What did you do? I wrote back. We talked to each other. On the second day of transmission, the 4th facility came to life. It wasn't a maintenance technician. The modulated signal was smoother, faster, composed by someone fluent in the interface. The message identified the sender as CMDRR Okafor, USN, and stated in compressed but precise language that the facility was a naval continuity site in the Southern Cascades, staffed by 3 military personnel and 2 civilian specialists. They had been monitoring the seismic handshake for 24 hours before responding, running analysis on the signal propagation to verify it wasn't hostile, which meant someone in that mountain had equipment and expertise that exceeded anything Warren's facility possessed. Okafor's second message was a question. Who activated the network? Warren responded with his maintenance technician designation and facility code. Okafor's reply was immediate. You are not authorized for network activation. Stand by for instruction. Warren set down the pen and looked at me. The expression on his face was one I hadn't seen before. Not the institutional compliance I expected, but something defensive, almost territorial. He'd spent 9 hours cutting through a vault door to reach the equipment that made this contact possible. He'd violated every protocol he'd been hired to uphold. He'd done it because a mail carrier told him to. And now, a naval commander was reasserting the authority structure that had abandoned both of us. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to tell him that authorization protocols are inoperative because the authorizing personnel are dead, and that the network was activated by necessity, not by protocol, and that the 60 infected lying on the slope above this facility were drawn here by the same geothermal signature his facility produces, and that the only thing that stopped them from breaching the entrance was the seismic communication he's now trying to restrict. Tell him that. In 60 characters, tell him what fits. I'll tell him the rest. Warren composed his response with a control that bordered on fury. Each word selected and discarded and reselected until the message read, Network active by necessity. Principals absent all sites. Infected, respond to signal. Do not restrict. Before, took 4 minutes to reply. When the message resolved, it was different from what I'd anticipated. Not a command, not a reprimand, a concession, compressed into the same brutal bandwidth. Understood. We have observed same behavior. Infected static when signal active, request coordination. Warren exhaled. Not relief. Release. The military authority he'd served and feared and waited for had arrived, and it hadn't overridden him. It had asked to coordinate. The word choice mattered. Not command. Not direct. Coordinate. Because Okafor, somewhere in a mountain 200 miles north, had watched the same phenomenon through his own sensors and reached the same conclusion we had. The signal was doing something none of them understood, and understanding it required more than one pair of eyes. Over the next 6 hours, the 5 active facilities established a communication rhythm. Warren and I served as the relay hub. Our facility was geographically central, and the transponder placement gave us the strongest signal propagation. Helen in Nevada reported her surface count holding steady at 31, all prone. The first facility, a technician named Yoon in the Eastern Sierra, reported 48, also prone. Okafor's site had fewer, just 11, but his Cascades location was higher elevation with steeper terrain. The numbers correlated with the topographic model. Lower, more accessible sites drew more infected. Higher, steeper sites drew fewer. But in every case, the behavior was identical. They came. They lay down. They listened. Breyer had settled into something I'd never seen from her. Not watch posture, not rest posture. She lay on her side in the operations center with her ear pressed flat to the floor, eyes open, breathing steadily. She was doing what the infected were doing, listening through the ground to a conversation that moved through stone. The difference was that Breyer listened with curiosity rather than compulsion. She could lift her head any time. She chose not to. I wrote one last message for the night, addressed to no specific facility, transmitted into the bedrock for anyone with a matching transponder and the ability to read. Day 1 of network. 5 sites. 5 voices. The ground carries us. More tomorrow. Warren keeps the schedule, not his old schedule. The maintenance tech rotation designed for systems that serve themselves. A new one, built around the communication windows, the sensor checks, the relay coordination that turns 5 buried facilities into something that resembles a functioning whole. He updates the binders with observations no principal ever anticipated. He maintains equipment he was never authorized to use. He does this with the same precision he applied to everything before, except now the precision serves people instead of protocols. I deliver. That's what I know how to do. Every morning I sit at the transponder and send the day's first message to Helen, to Yoon, to Okafor, to the unnamed 4th facility that responds only in automated pings, but that we address anyway, because a letter matters even when nobody opens it. I compose in 60-character fragments, and each fragment is a route stop. An address visited, a presence confirmed, a proof of connection delivered through solid rock. Briar sleeps with her ear to the floor. Above us, the slope holds its congregation of motionless listeners, face down in the soil, absorbing a conversation they'll never join, but seem unable to leave. We don't know what they hear. We don't know what it means. We know that while the ground carries voices, they stay still. So we keep talking. The route continues.